Get out! The wagon didn't slow down, not even for a second. One moment, Lily Bennett's fingers were reaching for the canvas flap. The next two hands shoved her from behind, and she hit the snow face first. By the time she pushed her, the wheels were already turning away. Her supplies were gone. Her horse was gone. Her 4-year-old daughter was still inside that wagon, and the man driving it was her husband's own brother. The temperature was dropping. The storm was getting worse. And nobody was coming back for her. If this story moves something in you, subscribe to our channel, watch until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The cold hit her all at once. Not gradually, not the way cold creeps up on you when you've been standing outside too long. This was the full weight of a Wyoming winter landing on her chest, like something dropped from a great height. Lily Bennett went down on her hands and knees in the snow, and for 3 full seconds she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the ground beneath her palms and understand that it was real. She was on the ground. The wagon was moving. Wait! Her voice broke before it even reached a shout. Thomas, Thomas! The canvas flap at the back of the wagon swung once in the wind, then went still. The 2 horses didn't break stride. The wheels kept turning, cutting fresh tracks into the snow, and Lily watched those tracks with a kind of hollow disbelief, the way a person watches something that their mind refuses to fully accept. Thomas, please, I have a child. There's Emma, she's inside. Emma stays with us. The voice came from the front of the wagon, muffled, but unmistakable. Thomas Bennett, her husband's brother, the man who had stood beside her at the funeral, and gripped her hand and said, "We take care of our own." He didn't even look back. She stays with us. You slow us down, Lily. You always have. You can't. She struggled to her feet, but her boots sank into the drift, and she went down again, harder this time. She's my daughter. She's mine. Thomas, you cannot take my child. We'll send someone back for you when the storm breaks. His voice was already growing smaller, already traveling away. If the storm breaks. The if was deliberate. She knew it was deliberate. The wagon disappeared around the bend in the trail, swallowed by the white curtain of falling snow, and Lily Bennett was alone. For a moment, she simply knelt there. The wind moved over her like something alive, worming its fingers into the collar of her coat, finding every gap between her buttons, every place where the fabric had worn thin. She had her coat. She had her gloves because she'd been wearing them when they put her out. She had the dress she was wearing and the boots on her feet and nothing else. No supplies, no food, no blanket, no way to make fire. They had taken everything. They had been planning this. That thought arrived slowly, the way the worst realizations always do, not all at once, but in pieces, each piece worse than the last. The wagon had stopped back there because Thomas said the axle was straining. He'd asked everyone to climb down and walk for a spell to spare the horses. She'd climbed down. The others had climbed back up. She had not been invited to climb back up. No one had called her name. No one had extended a hand. The wagon had started moving, and by the time she understood what was happening, she was already 20 feet behind it, and Thomas was saying those words. Get out, like she was a stone in his boot he'd finally shaken free. Her daughter was in that wagon. Emma, 4 years old. Brown curls and a gap-toothed smile, and a habit of falling asleep with both fists pressed against her cheeks, like she was trying to hold her own face on. Emma didn't know what was happening. Emma probably thought her mama was walking alongside the way they sometimes walked when the trail was smooth enough. Emma probably wasn't scared yet. Lily couldn't afford to think about Emma right now. She stood up again, more carefully this time, and turned in a slow circle, trying to get her bearings. The trail was still visible beneath the snow, 2 rutted lines running east toward the valley. If she followed it, she'd be following the wagon. She'd reach the settlement eventually, assuming she didn't freeze first, assuming the storm didn't bury the trail entirely, assuming her body held out. How long had they been traveling today? 6 hours, maybe 7. She thought there'd been a trading post about 2 hours back. She remembered the smell of wood smoke when they'd passed it. 2 hours by wagon. On foot in this weather, through this snow. She didn't let herself finish the calculation. She started walking. The first hour was almost manageable. She kept her head down and her arms crossed tight against her chest, and she focused on the trail, on keeping her feet in the ruts where the snow was packed down enough to hold her weight. She thought about practical things. How long before Thomas reached the settlement? Whether anyone there would listen when she arrived, what she was going to say to her daughter. She did not think about the cold. You could do that for a while. You could refuse to acknowledge it, carry it at arm's length in your mind, the way you could carry fear before it became too heavy to manage. She'd learned that during the 2 years after her husband Robert died, you could refuse to look directly at the worst thing and still function, still put one foot in front of the other, still make decisions. But the cold was patient. By the end of the first hour, she couldn't feel her feet clearly. Not gone, she could still feel them, but the sensation had a quality to it. Now, a strange woody numbness around the edges that she recognized was the beginning of something serious. She stopped and stamped hard 3 times, felt the blood move painfully back into her toes, and kept walking. She thought about the trading post. Had it been before or after they'd crossed that creek with the ice on it? She was having trouble keeping the day ordered in her mind. The cold was doing something to her thinking. She could feel it, that slight drag on her thoughts, like trying to pull a bucket from a well that was just a little too deep. She whispered Robert's name once, just to have something to say into the wind. He didn't answer. He never did anymore. "All right," she said instead to herself, to the empty white trail. "All right, Lily, keep moving." The second hour was when things started going wrong. The snow was coming sideways now, driven by a wind that had found its strength and was not interested in letting it go. She could see maybe 20 feet ahead before everything dissolved into white. The wagon tracks were still there, but they were filling fast. She could watch it happen if she stopped and looked. The wind ghosting powdery snow into the ruts, shaving them down minute by minute. She fell 3 times. The third time her hands weren't quick enough to catch herself, and she went down face first, came up spitting snow, and stayed there on her hands and knees for a moment that stretched out longer than she intended. "Get up," she told herself. Her body said in a minute. "Now," she said. "Emma is at the end of this trail, and you are going to stand up right now, and you are going to walk." She stood up. She walked. But something was wrong with her left foot. She'd twisted it going down, and now every step sent a thin, bright wire of pain up through her ankle, and she found herself compensating, favoring the right side, and she knew the way. You know things you don't want to know, that this was bad. This was going to slow her down. The math had already been bad. This made it worse. She stopped. She had to stop. Not because she wanted to, but because the rational part of her mind, the part that still had enough warmth to function, was telling her that if she kept walking on this ankle in this cold, she was going to collapse in a mile or two and not get up again. She looked around. There was a shape to her left, half buried in the drifts, the remains of a deadfall, a tangle of old pine trunks that had come down maybe years ago and been slowly folded into the landscape. Not shelter exactly, but better than nothing. Better than standing in the open with the wind coming straight at her. She crawled into the space between the trunks and pulled herself into the smallest shape she could manage. Knees to chest, arms wrapped around her legs, her back pressed against the bark. The wind dropped a fraction. Not much, but a fraction. She closed her eyes. Just for a moment, she told herself. Just to rest the ankle and gather herself and think. "Don't sleep," said the rational part of her mind. And it was very far away now, like a voice calling down a long tunnel. "I'm not sleeping," she answered it. "You're sleeping. I'm resting. That's the same thing, Lily." She forced her eyes open. The snow was still falling. The light was changing, not getting darker exactly. Just flatter, the gray afternoon pressing down toward the gray of dusk. How long had she been walking? She'd lost count. She wasn't sure anymore if it had been 2 hours or 3, or whether the trading post was ahead of her or behind. She thought about Emma's face. She thought, "I am not dying in this snow." And then very clearly, she thought, "I might be dying in this snow." That was the moment the fear arrived. Not the manageable fear she'd been carrying, but the real thing, cold and absolute, settling over her chest like a weight. She had no fire. She had no food. She had no way to signal for help. She was alone in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard, with a twisted ankle, and the temperature was dropping, and no one knew where she was, because the people who were supposed to know had put her here on purpose. Please. She wasn't sure who she was saying it to. Robert, maybe. Or whatever lived behind the sky that sometimes listened and mostly didn't. Please. Someone has to find me. I can't. Her voice broke, and she pressed her face against her knees and breathed and tried to stay inside herself, tried not to drift. Emma needs me. Please. The wind answered her with snow, and then so faint she thought she was imagining it. She heard something. Hoofbeats. She didn't move at first. The sound moved in and out, one moment clear, the next, swallowed by the wind, and she told herself she was hearing things. Her mind manufacturing the sound she most needed to hear. She'd read about that. She'd heard about trappers and soldiers who near the end heard music or voices or the sound of water. The mind trying to comfort itself as the body failed. But the sound got louder. And then it had a direction. She pulled herself upright against the deadfall, grabbed a branch for balance, and looked toward the trail. The snow was thick enough that she couldn't see far, but she could hear the rhythm now. One horse, not multiple, moving at a steady pace. Not rushing. Someone who knew how to move in weather like this. Hey! Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She tried again, louder. Hey, over here! Nothing changed in those hoofbeats. Still the same steady rhythm. The snow-swallowed sound, she knew that. She looked around frantically and found a dead branch near her foot, grabbed it, held it up, and waved it over her head, even though she wasn't sure anyone could see her. Please, I'm here! The hoofbeats slowed. Lily stopped breathing. They slowed further, from a walk to something hesitant, uncertain, and then stopped altogether. She heard the creak of leather, the sound of a horse blowing air through its nose, and then a voice, low and cautious, coming from somewhere ahead on the trail. Hello. Here. She waved the branch again. I'm here off the trail near there's fallen trees, please, I'm here. A long pause. Long enough that she started to think he'd decided he was hearing things too. Started to think he was going to ride on. And then the horse appeared through the white. A big dark animal moving carefully through the deep snow, and on its back, a man bundled in a heavy coat hat, pulled low, ice-crystalled in the brim. He pulled up about 10 feet from her and looked at her from under the brim, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He was younger than she expected. Somewhere in his 30s, she guessed, though the cold and the wind-weathered quality of his face made it hard to be sure. He had dark eyes that moved over her, the way a careful man's eyes moved, not rude, not assuming, just assessing. Taking inventory. You fall from a wagon. Something in her chest went brittle, and she thought, if I tell him the truth, will he think I'm lying? Will he think I'm a woman who causes trouble, who makes enemies, who gets herself put out on the side of the road in a blizzard, because she deserves to be there? Yes. And because the word felt dishonest without more, I was put out of it. His expression didn't change. He studied her for another moment, looked at her ankle, looked at her hands, looked at her face, and whatever he was calculating, he reached the end of it quickly. Can you ride? I think so. Think's not good enough in this cold, ma'am. Can you ride? Yes. She straightened her spine and looked him in the eye. Yes, I can ride. He dismounted in one smooth motion, led the horse the last few feet to her, and without ceremony or excessive gentleness, he put his hands under her arms and lifted her up onto the saddle. She gripped the pommel. He handed her the reins, then swung up behind her, and she felt the warmth of him, even through both their coats, the simple animal warmth of another person who wasn't frozen yet. My name's Caleb. Caleb Anderson. Lily Bennett. All right, Lily Bennett? He clicked his tongue at the horse and they began to move. Don't fall asleep on me. I wasn't sleeping. You were about 10 minutes from it. He said it matter-of-factly, no judgment. I've seen it enough times. You know what you're doing when you start thinking the cold isn't so bad. She did know, actually. She didn't answer. You're freezing. That's what. Your body stops fighting and starts lying to you. Tells you it's fine, tells you a little rest won't hurt. He guided the horse carefully around a drift. The ones who listen to it don't wake up. You've found people out here before. I've found what's left of them. A pause. You're the first one I've found in time. She didn't know what to say to that. The horse moved steadily through the storm, and she focused on staying upright, on keeping her grip, on not letting her head drop forward the way it wanted to. How far is your ranch? About 40 minutes. He paused. Might be an hour in this. Don't worry about the time. I have a daughter. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out on its own, pushed by something that had been pressing against her chest since the moment the wagon disappeared. She's 4. They took her with them, the people who left me. They took Emma with them. A silence. The wind filled it. She's with family. She's with her uncle, my husband's brother. She paused. He's the one who put me out. She waited for a response. For doubt or the particular quality of stillness that meant a person was quietly revising their opinion of you, deciding maybe there was more to the story. Maybe the woman had done something to deserve it. Maybe there were two sides. What she got instead was, we'll deal with that when you can feel your hands. Simple. Matter of fact. Not a dismissal, more like a man filing information in the right order. First things first. She liked that unexpectedly. Thank you for stopping. Don't thank me yet. But there was something in his voice that might have been the beginning of warmth. If warmth were a thing he gave out carefully in small measured doses. Let's get you somewhere you're not going to die first. The cabin appeared through the snow, like something she'd invented, solid and dark and improbably real, with a thin line of smoke rising from the chimney that she fixed her eyes on and refused to look away from. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant she was going to live through this night. Caleb helped her down from the horse. Her legs barely held, and he caught her without making anything of it, just steadied her and kept his hand at her elbow while he pushed the cabin door open. The heat hit her like a wall. She stopped in the doorway. She hadn't realized how cold she'd gotten until warmth had something to push against. It felt like pain, not a bad pain, but an overwhelming one. The sensation of a body coming back online, nerves waking up and reporting in all at once. Sit, Caleb said, and guided her to a chair near the fireplace. He disappeared briefly. She heard him outside, heard the sound of the horse being seen to. A man who put his horse up before he warmed himself. She noted that. You could tell a lot about a person from the order of things they considered important. When he came back, he had her coat off before she fully registered. He was going to remove it, and he was checking her fingers with that same matter-of-fact efficiency, not unkind, just practical. Looking for damage. Your ankle. Twisted. I don't think it's broken. Let me see. He crouched down and worked her boot off carefully, and she bit the inside of her cheek against the pain when it flexed, but she didn't make a sound. He rotated it gently, watched her face. Not broken, he agreed. Ligament, probably. You'll need to stay off it. I need to get to the settlement. My daughter. Your daughter is warm and with family tonight. He looked up at her level and direct. Are you warm and alive tonight? Because if you'd kept walking another hour in that storm, we'd have 2 problems instead of 1. She opened her mouth, closed it. You can't help her if you're dead. Not harshly, like a simple statement of arithmetic. Eat something, sleep. Tomorrow the storm will break or it won't. If it breaks, we ride to the settlement. And if it doesn't break, then you eat something and sleep another day. She stared at him. He was already moving, pulling a pot that had been sitting on the edge of the hearth, checking its contents, hanging it back to warm. Why? He turned around. Why what? Why are you helping me? She held his gaze. You don't know me. You could have ridden past. Most people would have ridden past. Something shifted in his expression. She couldn't have said exactly what. Only that it moved the way water moves when something stirs it from below. Probably. So why didn't you? How was quiet for a moment. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he turned back to the pot and said without looking at her, because I needed to decide what kind of man I was today. She didn't push further. She sat with that, the strange weight of it, the way it landed, and watched the fire, and thought about Emma, tucked somewhere warm and unknowing. She thought I will see her tomorrow. She thought, I am not going to cry in front of this stranger. She thought, I am going to find out exactly what Thomas Bennett has told those people in the settlement. And then I am going to decide what I'm going to do about it. The food Caleb put in front of her was simple beef stew, thick and hot with bread that had gone a day past fresh but still held together. She ate it faster than was dignified. He said nothing about that either. He sat across the fire with his own bowl and ate in silence, and she found the silence comfortable rather than awkward, which surprised her. How long have you been out here alone, she said, because she was a woman who asked questions and had been told all her life that this was a failing. He looked up. About 4 years. Since I had reason to be somewhere else. He returned his attention to his bowl. Didn't work out. That was all he offered, and she didn't take more. She understood about things that didn't work out. She understood about the particular way a person could collapse inward after enough of them could build walls from disappointment and call it wisdom. What she didn't understand was how a man could survive 4 years alone at the edge of the world and still stop for a stranger in a blizzard. That seemed like an act of profound hope from a person who'd given up on hoping. She thought about asking him. She thought better of it. You should sleep. I'll take the floor. You take the bed. That's your bed. And I'm offering it. He met her eyes briefly. There's no argument here, Mrs. Bennett. I've slept on worse. She almost told him she'd take the floor herself. But her ankle was throbbing, and the warmth had turned her limbs heavy in a way that told her her body was finally doing what it needed to do. Finally standing down from the emergency it had been running. She needed to be rested tomorrow. She needed everything she had. Thank you. He nodded once like a man setting an agreement. She lay down and pulled the blanket up and stared at the low ceiling and thought about Thomas Bennett's face. The profile of it turned away, not looking at her as the wagon moved, and felt something harden inside her chest. She had spent 2 years being grateful for every scrap of help that came her way. Grateful to the neighbors who brought food after Robert died. Grateful to Thomas for offering to take her west with them when the land dried up and there was nothing left to stay for. Grateful even for the place in his wagon, even when he made her feel the cost of it every single day. Even when his wife made comments. Even when the children were kept away from Emma as though poverty were contagious. She had been grateful for the scraps and accepted the cruelty around them as part of the price. Not anymore. She wasn't sure exactly what she was going to do. She wasn't sure what power she had, or what the law said, or whether anyone in that settlement would take her side against Thomas, who was a man and a landowner, and had probably already told them some version of the story that made him the reasonable party. But she knew this. She was alive. They had tried to ensure she wouldn't be, and she was alive anyway, and that felt like it meant something. Like it gave her the right to something that the frozen trail had been supposed to take from her. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she would figure out what that something was. The fire crackled. The wind pressed against the cabin walls and was held back. Somewhere outside, Caleb Anderson's horse shifted in the lean-to. Lily Bennett closed her eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, she slept without fear. Morning broke gray and cold, but the howling had stopped. She knew it before she opened her eyes. The quality of the silence was different, the kind of quiet that follows a storm rather than lives inside one. She lay still for a moment, cataloging ankle-aching stiff through both shoulders, but hands and feet all present and reporting. Alive. Still alive. She sat up. The cabin was empty, but the fire had been fed recently, still strong, freshly banked. He'd been up early. She could hear movement outside the particular rhythm of morning barn chores, and she sat by the fire and looked around the cabin for the first time in real daylight. It was sparse, functional. Every object in it was there because it served a purpose, and there was nothing in it that served no purpose. No decorations, no photographs on the mantel, no evidence that the man who lived here had ever wanted anything beyond the bare survival of the next season. But it was clean, meticulously clean. And there was a shelf of books above the bed. Real books, not almanacs. Actual novels, and one leather Bible that had been handled enough that the spine had cracked and been carefully repaired. A man who read. a man who held things carefully once he decided they mattered. She was studying the titles when the door opened and Caleb came in stomping snow from his boots. "Storm's over." "Mostly. There'll be drifts on the trail, but we can get through. Then we should go. After you eat." He moved to the fire without waiting for agreement, started the process of breakfast with the same quiet efficiency as everything else he did. She watched him. "Were you always this decisive?" He didn't look up from the pan. "Were you always this impatient?" "Yes." She said it without apology. "My husband said it was my worst quality." "What did you think?" "I thought it depended on what you were impatient for." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "I was impatient to be free of people who were using me. I was impatient for my daughter to be somewhere safe. I was impatient for my husband to tell the truth about how sick he was before it was too late to do anything about it." She paused. "I'm not sorry about any of those." Caleb set a plate in front of her and stood back. For a moment, he just looked at her. Really looked the way he'd looked at her on the trail yesterday, that measuring quality. "No," he said finally. "I don't expect you are. He sat down across from her, and for the first time she noticed something she'd missed the night before: the slight hesitation in the way he settled into his chair, a careful quality in how he distributed his weight. An old injury, she guessed. Something that had healed wrong or healed slowly. She didn't ask. They ate in the same easy silence as the night before. It wasn't the silence of two strangers who had nothing to say. It was the silence of two people who were still deciding what they were to each other, what the rules were, where the lines sat. "What do you know about the man who runs the settlement?" "Harlan Cross." Caleb's jaw tightened, just slightly, just for a moment. "Enough." "What's enough?" He turned his cup in his hands. "He's the kind of man who helps people because it makes them owe him. He's the kind of man who knows where every piece of land in this valley is registered and what it might be worth someday. He's the kind of man who's very helpful to people when they're desperate." He paused. "And he was very helpful to your brother-in-law when Thomas Bennett's wagon rolled into town yesterday evening." Lily went still. "You know Thomas is already there. I rode past the settlement 2 weeks ago. Heard Cross was expecting new settlers, had arranged some kind of agreement about land rights." He put his cup down. "I don't know the particulars, but I know how Cross operates. If your name was on any piece of property, any claim your husband filed, anything you were owed, I'd want to know where that paperwork is before you walk through those settlement doors." Something cold settled in her stomach. Robert had filed a homestead claim. 6 months before he died, they'd talked about it, planned around it, the 160 acres that was supposed to be their future. She'd assumed Thomas was taking them west to settle it, to build on what Robert had started. "The claim," she said slowly, "it was in my name. Robert put it in my name because he said he wanted me to have something that was truly mine, that no one could take." Caleb looked at her. "Thomas doesn't have a claim of his own." Her voice was very flat. "He said he was going to homestead new land out here, but he never filed." She stopped, started again. "If my claim transferred to him upon my death, then a woman dying alone in a blizzard would be very convenient for him," Caleb said quietly. The fire was warm. She felt cold anyway. He planned this, not a question. The knowledge assembled itself from pieces she'd been carrying separately, Thomas insisting she leave behind Robert's papers for safekeeping when they left. Thomas being oddly specific about which trail they'd take west. Thomas knowing that no one in the settlement would know her face, that any story he told about a sister-in-law who'd sadly perished in a storm would be believed and mourned briefly and forgotten quickly. "He's going to tell them I'm dead, most likely. And then he's going to file on my land, most likely." She sat with that for a long moment. The full scope of it. The premeditation, the patience. The fact that he'd stood beside her at her husband's grave, and she had trusted him because Robert had trusted him, and Robert was dead, and Thomas had never been trustworthy at all. She'd just had no reason to look closely enough to see it. And Emma. Her daughter in the hands of a man who'd just demonstrated exactly how far his loyalty extended. She stood up. Her ankle caught, and she grabbed the table edge, but she didn't sit back down. "I need to get to the settlement. Today. Now." "I know." He was already standing. "Finish eating. We leave in 20 minutes. She looked at him. "You're coming with me." Something in his face shifted. Not reluctance exactly, but a kind of careful reckoning. He was a man who had spent 4 years not going anywhere, not getting involved, building walls and calling them wisdom. Yes, just that. One word like something decided. "You don't owe me anything. You already saved my life." That was more than, "I know what I owe you and what I don't." He moved to the wall and took down his coat, checked the rifle she'd noticed leaning by the door. "The question is, what kind of man I'm going to be today?" He glanced at her. "You ready?" She was still in her borrowed blanket, borrowed warmth, borrowed time. She had a twisted ankle and no paperwork, and a 4-year-old daughter, somewhere in the hands of a man who'd left her for dead. Yes. And she meant it in every possible way. Outside, the storm had passed. The sky was the hard, clean blue that only comes after winter makes its worst threat and the world survives. Caleb saddled the horse and helped her up, and she settled into the familiar position from the night before, his warmth at her back, his arms on either side of her, the steady, solid presence of someone who had decided she mattered enough to go to the trouble. She thought about Thomas Bennett, warm in the settlement right now, telling his story, shaping what people believed. She thought, he has the first move. He always planned to have the first move. And then, but he's only had it since yesterday evening. And I'm still here. The horse moved out onto the trail. The snow lay deep and undisturbed, and their passage broke through it cleanly, steadily, without hesitation. Lily Bennett looked at the horizon and thought about her daughter's face. She thought, he does not get to win this. She thought, I did not survive that storm, so he could win this. She didn't say any of it out loud. There would be time for words when they reached the settlement, the right words in the right order to the right people. She was going to need to be very careful. She was going to need to be smart about this, smarter than she'd ever been, because she was walking into a situation that had been set against her with time and planning, and a story that had a 12-hour head start. But she was walking in. That was what Thomas hadn't calculated for. He'd calculated on a body in the snow and a signed over land claim and a child who would be raised to remember her mother only vaguely as someone who was lost in a storm. He had not calculated on a cowboy who needed to decide what kind of man he was going to be. He had not calculated on Lily Bennett still being alive. That, she thought, is going to be his problem. The settlement came into view around the long bend in the trail, a cluster of buildings throwing morning smoke into the cold blue sky. People already moving between them, lives already underway. Someone near the livery looked up and saw them coming. She held the horse steady and rode straight toward it. Someone near the livery looked up and saw them coming. And the way that man's face changed, the way his eyes went wide and his body went still, told Lily everything she needed to know about the story Thomas Bennett had already told. He looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. Maybe he was. She kept her spine straight and her chin level, and let Caleb guide the horse down the center of the settlement's main road, and she watched people stop what they were doing one by one. A woman at a doorway, a man coming out of the general store, 2 boys who'd been hauling wood and now stood with their arms full and their mouths open, and she thought, good. Look at me. I am very much alive, and I need you to understand that before Thomas gets a chance to explain it away. Caleb pulled the horse up in front of the largest building on the road. A painted sign above the door said, Harlan Crossland, Agent General Commerce. He swung down and helped her, and she landed on both feet with her ankle screaming and her face giving nothing away. You sure about this? He said quietly, close to her ear. I've never been more sure of anything. She pushed open the door and walked in. The room was warm and smelled of pipe tobacco and fresh-cut wood, and the particular kind of prosperity that announces itself deliberately. 3 men stood around a table covered in papers. 2 of them she didn't know. The third was Thomas Bennett, and the expression that crossed his face when she walked through that door was the most honest thing she had ever seen on it. Pure terror. It lasted only a second. She watched it happen, watched him go white, and then recover, watched him reassemble his face into something more controlled. But she had seen it, and more importantly, she had seen it before. He'd had time to hide it, and she was going to remember it. The man at the head of the table was Harlan Cross. She knew him without being told he had that quality. Some men have the quality of a room that's been arranged to tell you something about its owner. Everything about Harlan Cross said, "I am important here, and I have been important here for a long time, and you would be wise to remember that." He was somewhere past 60 thick through the chest, silver-haired. Careful eyes. The kind of eyes that were always adding things up. Those eyes went from her face to Caleb's face to Thomas's face, and she could see the calculation happening in real time. "Mrs. Bennett." His voice was smooth and measured, the voice of a man who'd talked his way through 100 difficult situations. "This is a surprise. Thomas told us." "I know what Thomas told you." She walked to the table and put both hands flat on the surface of it and looked at her brother-in-law. "Tell me, Thomas, what exactly did you say happened to me?" Thomas had found himself again. She'd expected that he was a man who'd planned this carefully, and a man who plans carefully also plans for things going sideways. He had a contingency. She could see him reaching for it behind his eyes. "Lily." He made his voice warm, made it relieved. "My God, Lily, we thought we looked everywhere for you. We sent men back along the trail at first light. Don't." The word came out quiet and absolute. "Don't do that voice. Don't do that face. There is no version of last night where you looked for me, Thomas, because you put me out deliberately, and you know it, and I know it, and the only question is whether anyone in this room is going to believe you over me." A silence fell over the room like a dropped stone. Thomas spread his hands. His voice stayed warm, stayed reasonable, stayed everything she'd watched him practice on other people for 2 years. "She's been through something terrible. She's confused. The cold does things to a person's mind. Harlan, you know that. The cold did not confuse me." She turned to Cross. "My name is Lily Bennett. My husband, Robert Bennett, filed a homestead claim on 160 acres in this valley 14 months ago. That claim is registered in my name. I have a daughter who was in that wagon last night and who I intend to take back this morning. And I am telling you in front of witnesses that Thomas Bennett put me out of his wagon in a blizzard, deliberately with the intention that I would not survive to contest his claim on my property." Cross looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at Lily. The room waited. "That's a serious accusation," and Cross said carefully. "It's a serious thing he did." Cross studied her for a long moment. That adding things up look, those careful eyes going back and forth between her face and Thomas's. She understood she was being weighed. She understood that Thomas had been here since the previous evening, had been talking to this man, had probably been very helpful and very cooperative and very believable. And she was a woman who'd walked in from a blizzard with a twisted ankle and another man's coat around her shoulders and nothing in her hands to prove a single thing she was saying. She held his gaze anyway. "Where are the registration papers?" Cross said. "Thomas has them. He insisted on keeping them during the journey for safekeeping." She didn't look away from Cross. "Check his saddlebags. Check his coat. He has my papers." "Those papers are mine," Thomas said. His voice had an edge in it now. The warmth had slipped just slightly. "Robert gave them to me before he died. He asked me to manage Lily's affairs because he knew she wasn't—" "My husband did not give you my land." Her voice was completely steady. She was surprised by that. She'd expected her voice to shake, expected the emotion to find cracks in it, but it came out level and clear. "My husband loved me. He would not have done that. And if you have a document that says he did, I would like to know very much when it was written and who witnessed it." The second silence was different from the first. Longer. Heavier. Cross set down the paper he'd been holding and looked at Thomas Bennett with the eyes of a man reassessing an investment. "Thomas, do you have registration papers for a claim filed under Lily Bennett's name?" Thomas's jaw worked. "I have papers for the claim, yes, but the circumstances." Simple question. Cross's voice had dropped half a register. "Do you have papers filed under her name or not?" A beat. "Yes," Thomas said. Everything shifted. Cross reached out one hand across the table, palm up, waiting. And that was when Lily saw Thomas make the decision to change tactics. Saw it in the moment before it happened, in the tightening around his eyes and the way his shoulders settled. He was going to give up the papers. He was going to give them up and pivot, find another angle, because a man like Thomas always had another angle. But he was going to have to give up the papers. His hand went to his inside coat pocket. He set a folded document on Cross's palm. Cross opened it, read it, looked up at Lily. Lily Elizabeth Bennett, 160 acres East Tributary, filed April 1883. Yes, Cross set the paper on the table between them, between her and Thomas, equidistant, belonging to neither of them yet. "I think," he said slowly, "that you two have some things to discuss. And I think I'd like to hear both sides of last night's events before any decisions get made about anything." He looked at Caleb for the first time. "Who are you?" "Caleb Anderson." No elaboration. No please. Just the name offered like a stone set down on a table. "Anderson. From the Eastern Ridge." "That's right. You found her?" "Last night, about 2 miles east on the trail." Cross looked at him for a moment. "And what did you find?" "A woman in the snow with no horse, no supplies, and no fire. Approximately 40 minutes from dying of cold." The room was very quiet. "No supplies," Cross repeated. "None. She had the coat on her back, that's all." Thomas started to speak. Lily cut him off without raising her voice. "Where is my daughter?" Thomas closed his mouth. "Emma, where is she right now?" "She's with Margaret at the boarding house. She's fine, Lily. She had a warm bed and—" Lily was already turning toward the door. "Mrs. Bennett." Cross's voice stopped her. "We need to sort this out properly." "We will sort it out properly." She turned back. "As soon as I have seen my daughter with my own eyes, I will come back to this table and we will sort every single piece of it out. But I have not seen Emma in over 12 hours, and she is 4 years old, and I am going to see her before I do anything else." She looked at Cross steadily. "Unless you're suggesting I don't have the right to go to my own child." Cross considered her. Then he moved aside. The boarding house was 2 doors down. She walked in without knocking, followed the sound of a child's voice to a back room, and pushed open the door. Emma was sitting on a bed, chattering to a woman in an apron, Thomas's wife Margaret, who looked up when Lily appeared in the doorway and went the color of old ash. Emma turned, and for one suspended second, she just looked at her mother. Then she was off the bed and across the room, and Lily went down on both knees on the floor, regardless of her ankle, and caught her daughter with both arms and held on. Emma's hands fisted in her coat. "Mama! Mama, where did you go? I woke up and you weren't there, and they said, "I know, baby." She pressed her face into Emma's curls. "I know. I'm here. I've got you." "They said you got lost in the storm." She held her daughter tighter. Over Emma's shoulder she looked at Margaret Bennett, looked at her with 4 years of accumulated grievances, and 1 night of freezing in the snow, and the knowledge of what this woman had allowed to happen, and Margaret looked away first. "I didn't get lost," Lily said quietly to Emma and to the room both. "I was found." Emma pulled back and looked at her face, studying it the way children study the faces of adults after something frightening, checking for evidence that everything is truly fine. "Are you hurt?" "A little, my ankle, but I'm going to be fine." "You're cold." Emma put both palms on Lily's cheeks, both fists just the way she slept pressed against the face to hold it in place. "You're still cold, Mama." "I know." She covered Emma's small hands with her own. "I'm going to warm up. I promise." She heard the door behind her and knew without looking that Caleb had followed, had positioned himself in the doorway, the way a man positions himself when he wants to be between a person and whatever comes next. She found she was grateful for that without being surprised by it. He seemed to understand instinctively where to stand. Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was pinched and careful. "Lily, I want you to know that I didn't last night when Thomas said we had to leave you. I told him we couldn't. I said, you didn't tell him hard enough." Lily stood up, Emma anchored to her hip. "He made a decision, and you went along with it, Margaret. That's a choice too." "I was frightened. The storm was bad and he said you'd be all right. He said someone would find you. He said someone would find me." She looked at the woman she had called family for 7 years. He said that. And you believed him. Margaret's eyes were wet. Lily studied her and felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not anymore. Something flatter. The particular exhaustion of understanding that a person isn't evil, just weak, which is in some ways worse. Evil you can fight. Weakness just keeps disappointing you. I need you to tell the truth, Lily said. When Cross asks you what happened and he will ask you, I need you to tell him exactly what Thomas said and exactly what you saw. Can you do that? Margaret said nothing. Margaret. She waited until the woman met her eyes. You have children too. Think about that. She carried Emma out of the boarding house and into the cold blue morning, and Caleb fell into step beside her without a word. What followed was 2 hours at Harlan Cross's table that Lily would remember for the rest of her life. Not for what was decided, but for the precise grinding education in how power operates when it doesn't want to give way. Cross was not stupid. That was the first thing she had to reckon with. Thomas was motivated by greed, which made him predictable. She knew what he wanted, and she knew every move he made was toward that thing. Cross was more complicated. Cross had positioned himself as a neutral party, while simultaneously having already arranged some kind of land deal with Thomas and Lily, could see him working out in real time how badly this changed his calculations. Thomas argued that Robert had verbally transferred management of the claim to him before his death. He had no witnesses to this. He had no documents. He had a story. Lily argued that the claim was filed in her name, registered legally, and that the papers Cross was holding were all the evidence anyone needed. Cross argued that the law was complicated out here, that things were settled differently in the territories than they were back east, that the practical matter of a widow, managing 160 acres alone. I'm not managing it alone, Lily said. I'm managing it. Mrs. Bennet, with respect, you arrived here with a twisted ankle and no possessions, and I arrived here alive, despite significant effort to ensure I wouldn't be. She kept her hands flat on the table. Mr. Cross, I understand that Thomas arrived here before I did, and that you have some arrangement with him. I understand that arrangement becomes complicated now that I'm sitting in front of you. I am asking you to set aside those complications and look at what is in front of you, which is a legal document with my name on it, and then tell me what the law says. Cross looked at her. The law says the land is yours, he said finally, like it cost him something. Thomas pushed back from the table. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Cross's voice was flat. Decisive. Not for Lily's benefit. She understood that. He was cutting his losses. Thomas had become an unpredictable investment. A man who'd left a woman to die in the snow, and unpredictable investments were bad for business. The claim stands in Mrs. Bennet's name. I'll file the confirmation today. Thomas stood up and looked at Lily with a fury she'd never seen on his face before, because he'd never before needed to show it. Because until now, she'd always been manageable, always been the grateful poor relation who swallowed whatever she was given. You have nothing. No money, no men, no one to work that land. You'll lose it in a season, and then you'll come to me begging. Thomas. Caleb's voice came from the corner where he'd been standing in silence for 2 hours. Quiet. Final. That's enough. Thomas looked at him. Some assessment happened. Caleb was not a large man, not physically imposing, but he had the quality of a thing that does not move when pushed, and Thomas apparently reached a conclusion because he picked up his coat and walked to the door and stopped. You'll regret this, to Lily. I already have several regrets. Trusting you is the main one, but I'm finished collecting them. The door closed behind him. The room held its breath. Cross looked at the land papers, looked at Lily, set them down in front of her. You've got yourself into a difficult position, Mrs. Bennet. That land is yours on paper. But Bennet is right that you'll need help working it. I know. She folded the papers and held them. They felt lighter than she expected. Paper and ink, and 14 months of planning lighter than the weight they'd carried in her mind. I'll figure it out. She looked at Caleb. He was already looking at her. They sat outside on the boarding house, step in the pale winter sun. Emma asleep across Lily's lap, worn out from the morning's emotion and the strangeness of the past 12 hours. Caleb sat on the step below, forearms on his knees, looking at the road. "You should come back with me." She'd been expecting this and not expecting it both at once. "To your ranch, until you can get onto the claim. The cabin on your land, you'll need to assess what condition it's in, whether it's livable." Thomas said, "Your husband built something, but if it's been sitting empty for over a year?" "I know." She looked down at Emma's sleeping face. "You don't have to do this." "I know I don't. I mean it. You saved my life, and you came in there today, and that's more than—" "Lily." He said her name simply, and it stopped her. "I have a ranch with more rooms than I need, and a barn that's in better shape than the house, and I know this valley better than anyone. You have 160 acres you've never seen, and a child and an enemy who is not going to be gracious about losing." He paused. "Let me help you." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what it cost a person to ask for help, the particular vulnerability of it, the way it required you to believe that the person you were asking wouldn't use the asking against you. She'd believed that about Thomas once, but Caleb was not Thomas. She understood that with a clarity that surprised her. Not blind trust, not the desperate gratitude of a woman with no options, but something more reasoned. She'd been watching him for 24 hours. Not what he said, what he did. He'd stopped. He'd stayed up through the night to keep her alive. He'd kept his word about the settlement without being asked twice. He'd stood in that corner for 2 hours and said nothing, until the one moment when saying something mattered, and then he'd said exactly enough and not a word more. "All right." Something in him settled. She saw it in his shoulders, a slight release, like he'd been holding something carefully and could set it down. "I need to know something." He waited. "Why do you live alone out there? 4 years, you said. What happened?" How was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. The wind moved down the road. Emma shifted in her sleep. "I had a wife. Eleanor. She died in childbirth. The baby too." He said it the way a person says something they've said before, worn smooth by repetition, the sharpest edges filed down, but the shape of it was still there underneath, still the shape of something that had broken something else. "I'm sorry. It's been 4 years. 4 years doesn't change the shape of it." He looked at her sideways, like she'd said something he hadn't expected. "No, it doesn't." They sat in silence for a moment that felt companionable rather than empty. The silence of two people who had both survived things and understood that you didn't need to explain survival to someone else who had done it. "I want you to know something," Lily said. "I'm not helpless. I know I arrived here looking like I was, but I'm not. I know how to work. I know how to manage a farm. I did it with Robert, and I did it for 2 years after Robert died, and I can do it again." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not looking for someone to solve my problems. I'm looking for someone who doesn't create new ones." The corner of his mouth moved. "That's a low bar. You'd be surprised how many people can't clear it." He looked at the road for a moment, and when he turned back, his expression had something in it she couldn't quite name. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that comes before one, the hesitation before warmth that has been kept stored for a long time. "I can clear it." Emma woke up then, the way small children do, immediately, fully, with no transition. She pushed herself upright, looked around, found her mother, and then located Caleb with the frank, unguarded appraisal that only children are still capable of. "Are you the one who found Mama in the snow?" Caleb looked at her. "Yes." Emma considered this for a moment with complete seriousness. Then she nodded once, as though confirming something she'd already suspected. "Good. Thank you." Something crossed Caleb's face that Lily had not seen there before. A flinch, but a soft one, like a door opening inward against a wind it hadn't expected. "You're welcome." And his voice for the first time had nothing held back in it. Lily watched him look at her daughter and felt something stir in her chest. Not romantic, not yet nothing. That simple, but a recognition. The recognition of a person who has been carrying something alone for so long, they've forgotten what it weighs, and who suddenly, without ceremony, sets it down. She thought about the land papers in her coat pocket. She thought about 160 acres. She had never seen a cabin that might or might not stand a spring she'd never tasted. She thought about Thomas out there somewhere angry and calculating, not done. She thought about a man who had needed to decide what kind of man he was going to be. She thought, this is the beginning of something. I don't know what yet, but it's the beginning. Emma climbed off Lily's lap and without hesitation planted herself on the step beside Caleb, close enough that her small shoulder pressed against his arm. He went very still for a moment. Then carefully he shifted to give her more room. Lily said nothing. She watched the road and the thin winter sun and her daughter leaning against a man who had been alone for 4 years, and she thought that sometimes the world surprised you. Not often. Not when you expected it to, but sometimes. The cold was still there. It was Wyoming in the dead of winter. The cold was always there, but she was not freezing anymore. She was sitting on a step with her daughter and a man who had made a choice that changed everything, and she had papers in her pocket that said she had a future, and Thomas Bennett was not going to take any of it from her. She was going to make absolutely sure of that. And the first step was getting to her land before Thomas found a way to make sure she couldn't. She told Caleb that on the ride back to his ranch, Emma wedged between them on the saddle, half asleep against Lily's arm. She said it quietly, without drama, the way you state a plan when the plan is the only thing standing between you and losing everything. Caleb listened. He asked 2 questions: how long had the claim been sitting empty, and whether Thomas knew exactly where the acreage was. She answered both. He was quiet for a while after that, the kind of quiet that meant he was working something through, not shutting her out. He'll try to file a counterclaim, Caleb said eventually. Say the land was abandoned. Territorial law allows it if property sits unworked past a certain threshold. How long is the threshold? Depends on who's reading the statute and how much they've had to drink. He said it without humor. Cross confirmed the claim today, which helps. But confirmation isn't the same as possession. You need to be on that land, working it, visibly. How soon? Soon. She pressed her lips together. Emma had gone fully asleep, dead weight against her arm, and Lily shifted to hold her more securely. I haven't seen the cabin. Robert filed the claim, but he died before he could. We were still saving the money to make the trip out. I don't know what's there. I know the parcel, Caleb said. East tributary, like the papers said. There's a structure. I've ridden past it. It's standing. She looked at the back of his head. You knew which land was mine before today. I knew which claim was filed in a woman's name a year ago and sat empty. A pause. Not many of those. She thought about that. The fact that he'd been out here 4 years, knew the valley parcel by parcel, had ridden past her land and noted it, the way a careful man notes things that don't fit the usual pattern. She thought about what it meant that a man like that had ridden east into a blizzard yesterday instead of staying warm by his fire. She didn't say any of that. She filed it. They reached his ranch as the last of the afternoon light was going thin and cold, and Caleb built the fire up without being asked, and put Emma in the bed she'd slept in the night before, and Lily stood at the hearth and looked at the shelf of books above it and thought about what came next. I need to go to my land in the morning. I'll take you. And I need to send a letter to my husband's attorney in Missouri. Robert used a man named Gareth Foles. He handled the homestead filing. If Thomas tries anything legal, I need Foles to know I'm alive and I'm here. Caleb looked at her. You've been planning this since Cross's table. I've been planning this since I was standing in the snow watching the wagon disappear. She said it plainly. I had a lot of time to think on the ride to the settlement. About Foles. About everything. She turned from the fire and looked at him directly. About what Thomas knows and what he doesn't. About what Harlan Cross will do now that he's confirmed my claim and made an enemy of Thomas. About whether Cross was genuinely persuaded or whether he was protecting himself. She paused. About the fact that Thomas said you'll come to me begging, which is what a man says when he still has a plan. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What's the plan? I don't know yet. But he said it too confidently for a man who'd just lost. She crossed her arms. There's something he has that I don't know about. Something he still thinks he has. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind had picked back up, nothing like the night before, but a reminder that winter hadn't finished with them. Get some sleep, Caleb said. Tomorrow we go to the land. We figure out what's there and what needs doing. One thing at a time. She wanted to push further. She wanted to stay up and turn the problem over and over until she found the edge of it she couldn't see. But her body was making its own argument. The ankle, the cold that had gone deep into her bones and hadn't fully left the accumulated weight of 2 days that had each been 3 days long. She slept. The cabin on her land was worse than she'd hoped and better than she'd feared. It stood. The roof had held through the winter so far, which mattered more than anything else. The door had warped in its frame and needed to be shouldered open, and when it finally gave, the cold inside was the settled cold of a space that had been unheated for months rather than overnight. But the walls were solid. The floor was intact. The stone fireplace at the center was the work of a man who knew what he was doing. Robert had known what he was doing when he put his hands to something physical. It was the human things that had gotten away from him. She stood in the middle of the space and turned in a slow circle. Emma stood beside her, very serious, holding her hand. "It's cold," Emma said. "We're going to fix that." "Is this ours?" "Yes." She squeezed her daughter's hand. "This is ours." She heard Caleb moving around outside, checking the structure, the way a man who knows buildings checks them methodically, pressing on joints, testing weight. He came back through the door with the expression of a man delivering a verdict. "Foundation is sound. You've got a corner post in the back that needs attention before spring, but it'll last the winter. Fireplace looks good." He looked at the roof. "You'll want to get up there when the snow clears and check for gaps, but I don't see any daylight from inside, so that's something. Can we live here?" "In a few days, once it's heated through and aired. Right now, it's a cold box." He looked at her. "You'll stay at my place while we get it ready." She'd expected the offer, and she'd also expected the complicated feeling that came with it. Gratitude and independence, running up against each other the way they always did. "I'll pay you back. Whatever it costs. Forget it." Caleb. Lily. He met her eyes. "Let me do this without it being a transaction. I'm not keeping score." She opened her mouth and closed it. This was the part she was worst at: accepting help without converting it immediately into debt, without turning generosity into obligation, so she could feel she was managing it instead of receiving it. "All right." Quietly, like it cost her something. "Thank you." He nodded and moved past her to examine the fireplace, and she thought, you have to learn to just say thank you. That's all. Just thank you. It shouldn't have been hard. It was hard. Emma had let go of her hand and was exploring the space with the focused intensity of a 4-year-old conducting a property survey, opening the one interior door, peering into the dark lean-to beyond it, making assessments. "There's a window in here," Emma announced, "but it's dirty. We'll clean it." "Can I have this room?" Lily looked at Caleb. He looked back with the faintest suggestion of amusement. "You can have that room," Lily said. Emma closed the door, apparently satisfied. Done. They spent 3 days getting the cabin ready, and those 3 days were the hardest and the best. Best 3 days Lily had had in 2 years. Hard, because the work was real work. Hauling wood, sweeping years of accumulated cold and damp from the corners, rehanging the door, so it sat right in its frame. Patching gaps she found once the fire was going, and the warmth showed her where it was escaping. Her ankle slowed her down, and she hated needing to favor it, hated every moment she had to step back from something and let Caleb do it. But Caleb didn't make anything of it. He just did the things she couldn't reach without commentary, without the particular performance of helpfulness that makes a person feel small. He worked alongside her, not for her, and Emma helped. She was 4 years old, and her help was the help of a 4-year-old, limited in execution, boundless in enthusiasm. But Caleb handed her tasks without condescension, and thanked her when they were done, and Lily watched her daughter bloom under it, the way children bloom under being taken seriously. On the second evening, when Emma was asleep in her claimed room, and the fire was going strong, and the cabin had finally shed the deep cold and begun to feel like a place a person could live. Lily sat across from Caleb with 2 cups of coffee and felt the specific luxury of a problem she was not currently trying to solve. "Tell me about Eleanor." He looked up. "You don't have to." She held his gaze. "But you know almost everything that's happened to me, and I know almost nothing about you. That seems like an imbalance worth correcting." He looked at the fire for a long moment. She thought he was going to redirect again, fold the subject back up the way he had before. But instead, he just started talking low, and even the way a man talks about something he's rehearsed in his head many times, but seldom said aloud. Eleanor had been from Ohio. They'd met when Caleb was working his father's farm, married young, too young, though he said it without regret, more like an observation about arithmetic. She'd wanted to go west, had had the kind of hope about the frontier that people who haven't been to it tend to carry. They'd come to Wyoming 2 years before she died. She'd loved it. She'd loved the open of it. She wasn't afraid of anything. She was afraid of very small things, spiders, a certain sound the wind made sometimes, but not of big things, not of hard things. He paused. "I've been afraid of big things my whole life, and I married a woman who wasn't. I thought maybe it would balance out." Did it? While she was alive. He turned the cup in his hands. "After I just had all the fear and none of the balance." She thought about Robert, thoughtful, gentle, honest in his way, but a man who kept the worst things to himself until they had grown too large to manage. 2 different kinds of men. Both of them gone. Both of them leaving women behind who had to figure out what came next. "The fear doesn't go away. I know that's not what you want to hear. It's true, though. But it changes. It gets less sharp. Like the difference between a new cut and an old scar." He looked at her. "How long did it take?" "I'll let you know when I get there." She said it without self-pity, just plain. Something in him relaxed. She could see it across the space between them, some held thing releasing like a fist, slowly opening. They sat with the fire and the silence and the sound of Emma sleeping, and Lily thought this is what a home feels like. Not the cabin, not the wood and the stone. This. 2 people who have been alone choosing not to be alone for one evening. She didn't say it. It was too new and too fragile, and she was a practical woman by both nature and necessity. But she thought it. On the 4th day, Thomas Bennett came to her land. She was outside sorting through the lean-to to assess what tools had been left there when she heard the horse. She knew it was trouble before she saw who it was, knew it from the way the horse was moving, deliberate and purposeful, not someone passing through. Thomas pulled up and looked down at her from the saddle. He had someone with him, a man she didn't recognize, broad through the shoulders, with the specific quality of stillness that meant he was paid to be still until he wasn't. "Lily," Thomas said. His voice had a new quality, not warm anymore, not angry. Something colder than either. She straightened and put down what she'd been holding and looked up at him without moving back a step. "Thomas, you've gotten yourself into something you don't understand. I want you to know that I don't blame you for yesterday. You were scared, you made accusations, Cross made a knee-jerk decision. These things happen." He paused. "It's not too late to correct them." "What are you offering?" He smiled. It didn't reach anywhere. "A settlement. I have partners interested in this land development interests. Lily, real money, not the homestead dream you and Robert cooked up. I'll give you fair value for the claim and enough to get you and Emma somewhere comfortable. Somewhere back east, where you could actually build a life without killing yourself in the process." She looked at him for a long moment. "Who are the partners?" His expression shifted slightly. "That's not relevant to Harlan Cross." The shift became more pronounced. She'd guessed it, and it was right, and he hadn't been expecting her to say it. "This is a business arrangement. Cross confirmed my claim yesterday morning. And by yesterday afternoon, he'd already made a deal with you for the land, which tells me the confirmation was never meant to hold. Which tells me there's something already filed or in the process of being filed that you think supersedes my registration." Thomas stared at her. The man next to him hadn't moved. But his quality of stillness had changed. Now it was the stillness of someone paying close attention. "You're smarter than Robert said," Thomas said. Not a compliment, a problem being noted. "Robert thought I didn't need to be smart because he was handling things." She kept her voice even. "He was wrong about that. What did you file?" "Nothing that concerns you." "Everything you file concerns me. What is it?" He looked at her for a long beat, calculating whether to tell her, whether it would frighten her into accepting the settlement, whether she already knew enough that withholding it was pointless. "There's a prior improvement claim," he said finally. "A man named Dobbins filed on 80 acres of your parcel 4 years ago. Abandoned it after 1 season. His abandonment was never properly recorded. Cross helped ensure that. Which means Dobbins' claim technically still stands, and Dobbins has agreed to assign it to me." The ground shifted under her, not literally, but in the way the ground shifts when you understand the problem is larger than you thought. 80 acres. Half her land. That's fraudulent. The abandonment wasn't recorded because Cross didn't record it, which means Cross manufactured a cloud on my title to benefit your transaction. That's a very serious allegation. It's an accurate one. Prove it. He said it simply, like a dare. Like a man who knows the distance between truth and proof, and has made himself comfortable in that distance. She said nothing. Her hands were quiet at her sides. She was thinking very fast. "Take the settlement," Thomas said. His voice had dropped the pretense of warmth entirely. "You can't fight Cross in this valley. He owns this valley, Lily. He owns the judges and the land office and the men who ride for the sheriff. You win at his table, you lose everywhere else. Take the money. Take Emma somewhere safe. And if I don't..." He looked at her with something that might have been in another man, in another life, something like pity. "Then I'll make this very hard for you." He turned his horse and left, and the man with him followed, and Lily stood where she was until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then she let herself breathe. She went inside and sat down and let herself feel the full scope of what he'd just told her. Not the threat she'd expected, the threat. The information. A prior claim assigned through Cross designed to cut her land in half and leave her with a parcel too small to be viable. It was elegant in the way that corrupt things are sometimes elegant, just inside the line of what could be proven wrong, reliant on her not having the resources or the knowledge to challenge it. How was right that she couldn't fight Cross in this valley? She was going to have to fight somewhere else. Caleb came back from the far edge of the property where he'd been checking the boundary markers and found her sitting at the table with her hands folded and her face still. Thomas was here. He stopped in the doorway. "I saw the tracks. He told me about a prior improvement claim, a man named Dobbins. 80 acres never properly abandoned assigned to Thomas through Cross." Caleb came in and sat down across from her. "Dobbins, Pete Dobbins." She looked up. "You know him?" "I knew him. He died 2 winters ago. Fever." He looked at the table. "His claim was abandoned when he left the valley 18 months before that. Everyone knew it. Cross didn't record the abandonment, because Cross was waiting for a use for it." He said it slowly, putting it together the same way she had. He keeps a pocket of leverage on every parcel he can. When Thomas came to him with a need, he pulled out the Dobbins card. She unfolded her hands. "If Pete Dobbins is dead, who assigned his claim to Thomas?" The silence stretched. "His widow," Caleb said. "Ellen Dobbins. She's still in the valley. She has a small place on the North Ridge. Cross lets her stay there at reduced rate, which means Cross has leverage on her too." Lily stared at him. If Ellen Dobbins was coerced into signing an assignment she didn't understand, or wasn't told the truth about what she was signing, then the assignment is invalid, and the prior claim is fraudulent, and Cross has committed fraud against at least 2 women in this valley. She said it steadily. "Let it sit. I need to talk to Ellen Dobbins." "That's not simple. She's alone up there. She doesn't trust people easily. She's had cause not to. I'm not asking her to trust me. I'm asking her to tell me what Cross told her when he put a paper in front of her." She looked at Caleb. "Will you take me to her?" He didn't hesitate. "Tomorrow morning." "Today." Lily. "Today, Caleb." Thomas said Cross already filed on the assignment. Every day we wait is a day that fraudulent document gets more established. I need to talk to Ellen Dobbins today. She stood up. Please. He looked at her for a moment, the kind of look that takes actual measure of a person that doesn't settle for the surface. Emma stays here. I'll have my neighbor's wife sit with her. Agreed. And you tell me what you want to say to Ellen before we get there. No improvising. If we spook her, we lose her. She nodded. She was already thinking through it. Ellen Dobbins was a small woman, somewhere in her 50s, with the particular quality of someone who had been told repeatedly that she was fragile and had eventually begun to believe it. She opened her door about 6 inches, looked at Lily and Caleb and started to close it again. Mrs. Dobbins. Lily spoke before the latch caught. My name is Lily Bennett. I have 160 acres on the east tributary, the land your husband filed on before he left. I'm not here about the claim. I'm here because I think someone put something in front of you recently that you were told was one thing and was actually another. The door stopped closing. 5 minutes, Lily said. That's all I'm asking. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say. I just want to tell you what I know, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. A long pause. The door opened. The door. Ellen Dobbins' kitchen was meticulous and cold, and smelled of old wood smoke and lavender, and she sat across from them with her hands in her lap, and listened while Lily laid out what Thomas had said, and what Cross had done, and what she believed the assignment document actually said, versus what Ellen had been told it said. She watched Ellen's face as she talked. Watched the small changes, the tightening around the eyes at one point, the slight drop of the jaw at another. The recognition. When Lily finished, Ellen was quiet for a while. He said it was an easement agreement, Ellen said finally. Cross. He said it was just giving someone the right to use the water access on Pete's old claim. He said it was good for me, that it would release me from any remaining obligations on the abandoned property. She looked at her hands. I didn't read all of it. I know that was foolish. I don't read legal language well, and he had that patient voice he uses, and I signed it. Lily kept her voice gentle. Do you have a copy? Do you have a copy? He didn't leave one. Of course he didn't. She paused. Mrs. Dobbins. Ellen, what Cross had you sign was not an easement. It was an assignment of your late husband's improvement claim, which gave Thomas Bennett the right to file on 80 acres of my property. It was done without your informed consent. Ellen looked at her, then looked at Caleb. Is that true? I believe it is, Caleb said. And if it is, your signature on that document was obtained fraudulently. What does that mean for me? It means, Lily said carefully, that if you're willing to tell the truth about what Cross told you when he put that paper in front of you, it means his whole arrangement falls apart. The prior claim, the assignment, the title cloud on my land. She held the woman's gaze. I know that's frightening. I know Cross has been letting you stay here at reduced rate, and that challenging him has consequences for you. I'm not asking you to do it without understanding what it costs. Ellen looked at the table for a long moment. Long enough that Lily thought she'd miscalculated, pushed too hard, asked too much of a woman who had already been asked too much. My husband built that claim with his own 2 hands, Ellen said quietly. He spent a season out there killing himself to make it work, and when the water dried up, he walked away from it because there was nothing left to fight for. Or he didn't walk away from it so some land agent could sell it out from under me. She looked up. Her eyes were clear. What do you need me to do? Lily released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. I need you to write it down exactly what Cross told you. In your own words on paper, signed and dated. What he said the document was. What he didn't tell you about what it actually said. Everything you remember about that conversation. And then what? And then I need to get that account to someone who can use it. A lawyer, Robert, had a man named Gareth Foles in Missouri. Foles can file with the Territorial Land Office above Cross's jurisdiction. Cross can own this valley, but he doesn't own the federal system. Ellen nodded slowly. She got up and found paper and a pen, and she sat back down and wrote while Lily and Caleb sat quietly across from her, and the kitchen was very still, except for the scratch of the pen. When she finished, she folded the paper and held it for a moment. There's something else, Ellen said. Lily went still. Cross has been doing this for years. Ellen looked at her steadily. The Dobbins claim isn't the only one. There's at least 2 others I know of claims he's kept open past their abandonment date that he can pull out when he needs leverage. And he's not the only one who knows it. She paused. The man who came to see him 2 weeks ago before your brother-in-law arrived. A man from the Territory Land Office. Caleb leaned forward slightly. Who? I don't know his name. But he came for 2 days and they met 3 times, and after the second day Cross was very pleased with himself. More than usual. She looked at the paper in her hands. I clean his office once a week. I shouldn't have been there the 3rd day. It was an extra day, he forgot I was coming. I heard them talking through the door. What did you hear? Lily's voice was very quiet. Ellen handed her the folded paper. I heard the man from the land office say that once the Bennett claim was vacated, the federal survey of the East Tributary Corridor could proceed without obstruction. She paused. And then I heard Cross say that removing the obstruction was already in progress. The room went cold. Lily looked at Caleb. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has just had something large and dark drop into a place he thought he'd cleared. This wasn't Thomas and a land grab. This wasn't a greedy brother-in-law and a corrupt valley agent. There was federal interest in the East Tributary Corridor. There was someone in the Territorial Land Office who wanted her land specifically, who had come to Cross specifically, who had confirmed 2 weeks before Thomas's wagon rolled into the settlement that the obstruction was already in progress. Thomas hadn't decided to leave her in the snow on his own. Someone had told him what to do. She looked at the paper in her hands and felt something that was the opposite of fear. Not bravery. Nothing that clean, but a very cold and very focused anger. The kind of anger that doesn't make noise. The kind that gets things done. Thank you, she said to Ellen Dobbins. I mean that. Will this be enough? Ellen said. Your lawyer, the land office, will this actually stop them? Lily folded the paper and put it in her coat next to the registration papers. She thought about a man from the Territorial Land Office sitting across from Harlan Cross 2 weeks ago. She thought about Thomas being given his instructions. She thought about a woman freezing in the snow while people with federal interests and corrupt agents and fraudulent documents were lined up between her and everything Robert had left her. She thought, they planned this for months. They had every advantage. She thought, and I'm still here. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm going to find out. She stood. Emma was back at the cabin with a neighbor's wife waiting. Caleb was on his feet already reading her the way he'd started to read her, knowing when she was ready to move before she said it. Outside, the winter sun had gone flat and pale, and the cold was building again toward evening. She mounted up and felt the familiar solidity of Caleb behind her, and she thought about what Ellen had said, and what it meant, and what it changed. It changed the size of the fight. That was all. It didn't change whether she was going to have it. It didn't change whether she was going to have it. And by the time they rode back to the cabin with the last of the daylight dying behind the ridge, Lily had already decided the first 3 moves. Caleb knew her well enough by now to let her think without filling the silence. That was one of the things she'd learned about him. In 4 days, he understood the difference between a silence that needed filling and one that was doing work. He kept the horse steady and didn't speak, and she turned the problem over in her mind, the way you turn a stone, looking for the edge that gives. The letter to Gareth Foles had to go out tomorrow, not the day after. Tomorrow. Ellen Dobbins's written account had to go with it. What Cross said, what the document actually was, the conversation Ellen had heard through the door. All of it organized and precise the way a lawyer would need it to be useful. And the man from the Territorial Land Office. She needed a name. The man who met with Cross. The one from the land office. Is there anyone in the settlement who would know who came through 2 weeks ago who Cross was meeting with? Caleb thought for a moment. Hattie Marsh runs the boarding house. She sees everyone who passes through. If he stayed in the settlement, he stayed at Hattie's. Will she talk to me? Hattie talks to everyone. The faintest dryness in his voice. The question is getting her to talk about the right thing. I can manage that. He glanced back at her just briefly. I know you can. Emma was awake when they arrived, sitting at the cabin table with Caleb's neighbor's wife, a round-faced woman named Clara, who had fed Emma biscuits and taught her a hand-clapping game and was apparently now her favorite person in Wyoming. Emma looked up when Lily came in, satisfied herself that her mother had returned intact, and went back to the hand-clapping game. Lily watched her for a moment and felt that specific parental combination of love and relief that has no clean name. She thanked Clara. Caleb walked her home. Lily put Emma to bed and sat at the table alone and wrote the letter to Gareth Foles by firelight, slowly and carefully, getting every word right. She wrote for 2 hours. When she was done, she had 4 pages. The history of the claim, the events of the blizzard, the confrontation with Cross Thomas's admission about the Dobbins assignment, Ellen's account, and the fragment Ellen had heard through the door. She wrote it the way a sober person states facts, no embellishment, no appeal to sympathy, just the sequence of events in order with the evidence attached. Then she folded Ellen's written account inside the letter, sealed it, and wrote Foles' address on the front from memory. Robert had made her memorize it. She'd never understood why he'd insisted on that when he could simply keep the address himself until now. He'd known somehow that she might need it without him. She sat with that for a moment. The specific grief of a man's foresight proving itself after he was gone to see it. "Thank you, Robert," she said quietly to the fire. Then she went to sleep because tomorrow was going to be hard and she needed to be sharp for it. Hattie Marsh was exactly what Caleb had indicated. A woman who talked the way some people breathe, continuously and without apparent effort, and getting her to talk about the right thing took about 4 minutes of patient steering. Lily sat across from her in the boarding house kitchen, accepted the coffee that was pressed on her before she'd finished sitting down, and let Hattie run through the weather and the new settlers and the condition of the road from the east. Before she said casually, as though she'd just thought of it, "I heard Mr. Cross had someone in from the land office a couple weeks back." Hattie's eyes brightened. "Oh, that was a strange one. Very official, that fellow. Very sure of himself." She refilled her own cup without being asked. "Dorian Marsh, no relation to me, different Marshes entirely. He's with the Federal Survey Division. That's what his papers said anyway. I saw them when he signed in. Federal Survey. Federal Survey. Not just the territorial office. Federal." Lily kept her face interested and pleasantly curious. "What on earth would a federal surveyor want with our little valley?" "Well, that's what I said." Hattie leaned forward confidingly. "He was very closed-mouthed about it, which only made me more curious, as you can imagine. But he dined here both evenings, and I couldn't help overhearing." She paused to allow Lily to appreciate that she'd been eavesdropping quite deliberately, that there's some kind of railroad interest, spur line maybe, coming up from the south. Lily set down her cup. "Railroad. That's what I gathered. Something about the East Tributary Corridor being the only viable grade through the ridge for 30 miles in either direction. Something about federal land grants for railroad right-of-way." Hattie waved her hand vaguely. "I don't understand all the legal parts of it, but I understood that Cross was very excited and that Mr. Dorian Marsh was very confident about something." Lily understood all the legal parts of it. Federal railroad right-of-way grants gave railroad companies and the federal agents who enabled them enormous power to acquire land in the path of a proposed line. The land didn't have to be purchased if it could be obtained through other means. Vacated claims, fraudulent titles, cleared parcels. The federal government could condemn and acquire, but it was slower and more visible than simply ensuring that the private claims standing in the way disappeared beforehand. Her 160 acres sat on the East Tributary Corridor, the only viable grade for 30 miles. They weren't after her land because Thomas was greedy. They were after her land because a railroad needed it, and someone with federal authority had decided that a widow's homestead claim was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a right to be honored. She stood up, thanked Hattie, and walked out into the cold. Caleb was waiting with the horse. He read her face. "Railroad." He went very still. "Railroad right-of-way. Federal Survey. My land sits on the only viable grade through the ridge for a spur line coming up from the south." She looked at him steadily. "Thomas didn't plan this alone. Someone told him about the land office interest. Someone told him that if I was out of the picture, the claim would be easy to acquire through Cross. Thomas got offered something money probably, or a favorable land deal somewhere else, in exchange for helping clear the obstruction. She paused. I was the obstruction. Lily. I know. She held up her hand. I know. This is federal. This is a railroad with money and influence, and federal survey agents working alongside corrupt local officials. This is not Thomas and Cross anymore. This is much larger than Thomas and Cross. Which means Foles needs to know all of it. The letter is already written. I need to add this. She thought quickly. Is there a way to get a letter out today? Not through the settlement post. Cross controls that. Ryder going to Cheyenne this afternoon. Sam Yates he's passing through on his own business. He'd carry a letter for $2. I have $1.30. I have $2. He said it without ceremony. She looked at him. He met her eyes with the expression of a man who considers this a non-issue and would prefer she treat it that way too. All right. Let's find Sam Yates. They found Sam Yates at the livery, readdressed the envelope, added 3 additional paragraphs to the letter Railroad Interest Federal Survey. Dorian Marsh's name resealed it with wax from the livery owner's desk and pressed it into Sam Yates's hand, with Caleb's $2 and a very clear description of Gareth Foles's office on Market Street in Kansas City. Yates looked at the urgency on Lily's face and said, I'll make it my first stop. She thanked him. She watched him ride out. She stood there until he turned the corner and was gone, and then she let herself breathe. That was the letter. That was done. Now she had to wait for Foles to respond, which would take at minimum 2 weeks, probably longer, given the time of year and the state of the roads. 2 weeks in which Cross and Thomas, and whoever was behind Dorian Marsh, could move file maneuver. 2 weeks in which she needed to be on her land visible and working it, and she needed to not give anyone any legal grounds to contest her presence there. She turned to Caleb. I need to move on to the claim. The cabin's not fully ready. I know. It's ready enough. I need to be there. Caleb, every day that I'm on your land instead of mine is a day they can argue I'm not actively occupying the claim. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him running through objections, the roof, the corner post, the cold, and setting them aside one by one against the weight of the argument she'd just made. I'll come every day. Check the structure, help with what needs doing. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He said it with a slight edge, the edge of a man who is tired of hearing that he doesn't have to do things he has already decided to do. She closed her mouth. Tomorrow. We move you in tomorrow. Tonight you're still at my place, and Emma sleeps warm, and the corner post can be looked at in daylight. She nodded. He turned toward the horse, and she fell into step beside him, and she thought about a railroad and a federal surveyor and a valley agent who had been setting this up for months, maybe longer. She thought about the fact that Robert had filed on that particular parcel because the east tributary had clean water and good grass, and he'd had no way of knowing what else it had, that it had the one viable grade through the ridge that a railroad coming up from the south would need. Robert had chosen the land because it was beautiful and because it had water. Someone else had looked at it and seen a right-of-way. She thought, I will not let them have it. Not because of the money. She wasn't naive enough to think she was going to extract anything like fair value from this situation, not with the forces that were arrayed against her. But because Robert had died before he got to see it. Because she had almost died in the snow to keep it. Because Emma deserved to grow up on land that her father had chosen for her. Some things were worth the fight, regardless of the odds. She moved in the next morning. The cabin was cold when they arrived, but took the fire quickly, the stone fireplace doing exactly what Robert had built it to do. Emma explored every corner with proprietary satisfaction, reinstated her claim on the back room, and informed Caleb that a shelf was needed under the window for her things. I'll build you one, Caleb said. Emma looked at him with the appraising gravity she'd adopted toward him. Part trust, part ongoing assessment. The way children evaluate the people they've decided matter. Today. Give me 3 days. 2. He looked at Lily. Lily looked at the ceiling. 2 days, he agreed. Emma nodded and took herself off to arrange her things on the floor in the shape of where the shelf would go. Lily watched Caleb watch her daughter, and she saw the thing she'd seen on the boarding house step, that soft inward flinch, that door opening against unexpected wind. He was careful about it. He didn't let it show on his face for long. But she saw it. She saw it, and she didn't say anything, and she filed it the way she filed everything for later, for when there was time to understand what it meant. They spent the day working the cabin in earnest, Caleb on the roof, while the morning was clear. Lily inside, getting the remaining damp out of the walls by keeping the fire high. Emma assigned to carrying wood from the pile outside to the stack by the hearth, a task she took with the seriousness of important employment. It was mid-afternoon when the rider came. She heard the horse first, the same way she'd heard Thomas's horse, with that sense of purpose to the gait that told you it wasn't someone passing. She was outside by then, checking the lean-to, and she moved to the corner of the cabin and watched the rider come up the track. It wasn't Thomas. It was the broad-shouldered man who'd ridden with Thomas on his first visit. The one with the quality of professional stillness. Except he was alone this time, and his stillness had a different quality now. Not the stillness of a man paid to wait, but the stillness of a man carrying a message he wasn't entirely comfortable with. He pulled up, looked at her. "Mrs. Bennett?" "Yes." "I've got a paper for you." He reached inside his coat. "From the county recorder's office." He held it out. She walked to him and took it without letting her hand shake and read it standing in the cold. It was a notice of contested title, filed by Thomas Bennett on behalf of himself and unnamed development partners, challenging her claim on the grounds of. She read slowly, carefully. Irregular filing procedures, disputed chain of title through the Dobbins improvement claim, and failure to demonstrate continuous active possession of the claimed parcel. Failure to demonstrate continuous active possession. She looked up at the man on the horse. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "When was this filed?" "This morning." Cross signed it. A pause. "It went through the county recorder." "Who is the county recorder?" He said nothing, which was an answer. Cross had moved faster than she'd expected. Not 2 weeks, 2 days. He'd seen her letter go out with Sam Yates, or Thomas had seen it, or someone had, and they'd decided they couldn't wait for Foles to respond. They were going to move the legal front, immediately establish the contest force, her into a defensive position that would cost money and time and attention she couldn't afford. Failure to demonstrate continuous active possession, she said again out loud to herself. "I've been on this land for 2 days. Ma'am, I'm just delivering the... I know what you're doing." She looked at him steadily. "Who are you working for, Thomas or Cross?" He said nothing, adjusted his grip on the reins. "The man from the Federal Survey Office. Dorian Marsh. Is he still in the valley?" Something changed in the man's face. Quick and small, but she'd been watching for it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." She held up the paper. "Thank you for delivering this." She turned and walked back into the cabin. Caleb had come down from the roof. He was standing inside the door, and he'd heard enough to know something had happened. She handed him the paper. He read it. She watched his jaw tighten. "They moved fast. They're scared." She said it and recognized it was true as she said it. They were scared, which meant they were feeling the pressure of what she'd sent to Foles, which meant they thought Foles could actually do something. "Foles can challenge this. The contest filing doesn't vacate my claim, it triggers a hearing. A hearing I can win if Foles can bring Ellen's account and the railroad interest in front of the right people." "That's a lot of ifs." "I know." She sat down. Emma was in the back room, apparently napping. She could hear the particular silence of Emma asleep versus Emma quiet. "But look at what they filed. Failure to demonstrate continuous active possession. I've been here 2 days, and they're already worried about it. That's their weakest argument. It means they know the Dobbins assignment is going to be challenged, and they need a second angle." Caleb set the paper on the table between them. "What do you need?" she thought. "Witnesses. People in this valley who can testify that I've been on the land working it since I arrived. The more the better. Clara. The Yates family, Sam's wife, was here the day you moved in. Old Porter from the north fence line. He rode past 2 days ago, and we talked." He paused. Hattie Marsh. Hattie knows everyone and talks to all of them. Yes. She looked at him. And you. Obviously. Something about the way he said it, the simple flatness of obviously no hesitation, no calculation, made her chest do something complicated. She looked away. I need to write again to Foles. Tell him about the contest filing. He needs to know the timeline has moved up. Sam won't be back from Cheyenne for another week at least. You'll need another way. Telegraph. She looked at the table. Is there a telegraph in the settlement? Cross's office. She looked up. Caleb met her eyes. There's one in Millhaven. 12 miles west. I can ride it. That's a day's ride in this weather. Half a day there, half back. I'll leave at first light. He said it the same way he said most things, as a settled fact that didn't require much ceremony. She stared at him. Caleb, you have your own ranch, your own animals. You've been here every day for a week, and you're talking about a day's ride in February to send a telegraph for me. Yes. Why? He looked at her with the expression of a man who is mildly frustrated by being asked a question he considers obvious. Because it needs doing. Because you can't leave Emma, and you can't make the ride on that ankle. Because if they file again before Foles knows the timeline has moved, you lose options you can't afford to lose. Caleb, and because I want to. He said the last part quietly, with a directness that landed differently from the rest, that had a different weight. You don't have to make a thing of it, Lily. I just want to help. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not good at this. At letting people help me. Robert used to say I held help at arm's length until it was almost too late to be useful. He wasn't wrong. The faintest pull at the corner of his mouth. I know he wasn't. She exhaled. Thank you. Ride to Millhaven. I'll write the message out tonight. He nodded. Got up. Moved toward the door to finish whatever he'd been doing on the roof before the rider came. Caleb. She stopped him. He turned. I know you're not doing this because you feel obligated. I know that. She held his gaze. I just want you to know that I see it. What it cost you to be here, to be involved in someone else's problems after 4 years of not being involved in anything. She paused. I see it, and I'm grateful for it. Not the obligated kind of grateful. The real kind. He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at her, and she had the sense again of that door opening against wind he hadn't expected. Get some rest. Write the message. I'll leave at first light. Howe was gone before she woke. She found the fire already built up and coffee already warm at the edge of the hearth and a note on the table. Not a long note, just the telegraph office address in Millhaven and the words back by supper in his plain, straight handwriting. She sat with the coffee and the note and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsteady for days. Emma came out of the back room in her nightgown, saw the note, pointed at it. Is that from Caleb? Yes. Where is he? He rode to town. He'll be back tonight. Emma processed this. Is he going to eat supper with us? I expect so. Emma nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose expectations have been confirmed. She climbed into the chair across from Lily and looked at her mother with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who hasn't learned yet to soften her observations. Mama. Yes. Do you like Caleb? Lily looked at her daughter. She thought about the right way to answer a 4-year-old's question, the honest way. The way that didn't make promises. She wasn't ready to make or deny things that were real. Yes. I like him very much. Emma seemed to consider whether this was sufficient information. He's kind, she said finally, with the air of reaching a verdict. He listens when I talk. Some grown-ups don't really listen. You're right about that. Papa listened. She said it plainly. Not with grief exactly. She'd been very young when Robert died, young enough that her memories of him were impressionistic, warm shapes without sharp edges. Caleb listens like Papa listened. Lily looked at her coffee. Yes, she said quietly. He does. Emma got up and went to the window. The snow stopped, she announced. Can we go outside? After breakfast. I want to see the creek. Caleb said there's a creek. There is. He said in spring it gets loud. He said you can hear it from the cabin. She turned from the window, already past the conversation, already somewhere else. Is it spring soon? Not soon enough, Lily said, but she was almost smiling when she said it. The reply from Foles came 11 days later. She hadn't expected it that fast. Caleb's telegraph had gone out. Yes, but Foles getting the message and turning a written reply around and getting it back through the winter roads to Wyoming in 11 days was either very good luck or a sign that Foles had moved with unusual urgency. It was the latter. His letter said so directly in the first sentence. Mrs. Bennett, I have been attempting to locate you for 4 months. Your brother-in-law wrote to me in October, stating that you had consented to transfer management of the Bennett homestead claim to him and requesting the relevant documentation. I told him I could not act without direct communication from you. He did not write again. When your letter arrived, I read it the same day, and I want you to understand the full significance of what you have uncovered. She read it standing at the table, Caleb beside her, Emma at the window, making some private architectural project out of the things on the sill. Foles knew about the railroad. He'd already been contacted by a colleague in Kansas City who'd gotten wind of the proposed spur line and the federal survey activity in the Wyoming territory. He knew Dorian Marsh's name knew it, but because Marsh had done similar work in 2 other territories, clearing private claims from railroad corridors through a combination of manufactured title defects and cooperative local agents. He was Foles wrote a man of known methods. And then the paragraph that stopped her cold. There is a federal land reform advocate currently working with the Department of Interior, a man named Aldous Webb, who has been building a case against Marsh's activities for the past 18 months. Webb has been looking for a case with clear documented evidence of coercion and fraud. Mrs. Bennett, the account from Mrs. Dobbins, combined with your documented history and the timeline you've provided, may be exactly the case he has been waiting for. I have taken the liberty of forwarding your materials to him today. I expect he will want to communicate with you directly. Do not under any circumstances make any agreements with Cross or Bennett before hearing from Webb. Lily set the letter down. Caleb read the last paragraph again. Webb, a federal advocate. She said it slowly, working through what it meant. Not just a lawyer, someone working inside the Department of Interior. Someone with authority to challenge Marsh directly. If he takes your case. This goes above Cross, above the county recorder, above whoever Thomas made his deal with. She looked at Caleb. This goes to the level where Marsh operates. And takes Marsh down with it, if Webb decides the evidence is sufficient. She picked up the letter again. Foles thinks it is. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, do you trust Foles? Robert trusted him. Robert was a careful judge of character. She paused. And Foles told Thomas no in October, without knowing anything except that he hadn't heard from me directly. He didn't have to do that. He could have handed Thomas whatever he asked for and collected his fee. He kept the door open. He kept the door open. She looked at the letter. He's been waiting for me. Outside, Emma had abandoned her window project and was now making the preliminary arguments for going to see the creek, which she'd been making at intervals for 11 days. Lily heard her and felt the specific warmth of ordinary life reasserting itself around the edges of the extraordinary situation she was living in. She set the letter down, looked at Caleb. Now we wait for Webb. How long? I don't know. She was honest about it. Could be weeks, could be... She stopped. Something was happening on Caleb's face, something she'd learned to read in the past week and a half. A decision being reached. What? He looked at her for a long moment, really looked the way he'd looked at her on the trail in the blizzard, that careful inventory. Lily. When this is over, when Foles and Webb and all of it is settled, and your land is clear, and Thomas is gone, and Cross is whatever. Cross becomes when he's been exposed. He stopped, started again, and it was the only time she'd seen him unsure of how to arrange words. I don't want to go back to 4 years. She held very still. I know we've only known each other a short while. I know you've had more happen to you in the last 2 weeks than most people have in years, and I know this is not the moment, for I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that." He exhaled. "When Eleanor died, I decided I was done. Done with wanting things. It was easier that way. But you made it." He stopped, looked at his hands. "You made it complicated." She looked at him for a long time. "Good complicated," she said quietly. Something moved in his face that she could only describe as relief. "Yeah, good complicated." She thought about 2 weeks ago, freezing in the snow, praying to whatever lived behind the sky that someone would find her. She thought about the sound of hoofbeats through the blizzard. She thought about a man who'd decided what kind of man he was going to be, and had been deciding it every day since, in small consistent acts that added up to something she didn't yet have a word for but could feel the shape of. "We'll see what we look like on the other side of all this." Not a dismissal, an acknowledgement. An agreement to look. He nodded. The relief stayed in his face. Emma appeared at the door. "Mama, the creek." Lily looked at her daughter, looked at Caleb, stood up. "Come on then. Let's go see the creek." Emma was out the door before the sentence finished. Caleb stood and held Lily's coat out for her the way you do for someone you've made a decision about. She put it on. They followed Emma into the cold afternoon onto their land, toward the sound of water running somewhere under the ice patient, and certain waiting for spring. 3 days later, a letter arrived from Aldous Webb. He was coming to Wyoming. I was coming to Wyoming, and the letter said he would arrive within the fortnight, which meant Lily had 14 days to make sure everything was in order, every piece of evidence organized, every witness prepared, every loose thread that Thomas or Cross might pull on, tied down tight. She read the letter twice, handed it to Caleb, and started making a list. Webb's letter was precise and brief in the way that powerful men who are confident of their power tend to write. No reassurance, no warmth. Just the facts of his arrival and a single sentence that told her everything she needed to know about what kind of man he was. "I have reviewed your materials, and I want to make something very clear. I am not coming to Wyoming to negotiate with Harlan Cross. I am coming to end him." Caleb looked up from the letter. He knows Cross. By reputation at least. Or from Marsh's other cases. She took the letter back. "This is bigger than us. We became the lever he needed to move something he's already been pushing at for 18 months. Does that bother you?" She thought about it honestly. No. A lever is still useful even when it's part of a larger machine. My land is still my land. Emma is still my daughter. She folded the letter. "I'll take the outcome." But the 14 days before Webb's arrival turned out to be the most dangerous 14 days of everything that had happened so far. Because Thomas Bennett, when he got wind that a federal advocate from the Department of Interior was riding toward Wyoming, stopped being patient. It started on the 4th day after Webb's letter. Clara came to the cabin in the morning, moving faster than her usual pace, her face carrying the particular expression of someone who has overheard something they weren't meant to hear and is wrestling with what to do about it. Lily brought her inside and put coffee in her hands and waited. "Thomas was at the general store yesterday evening," Clara said. "Late when he thought most people had gone. He was talking to that man, the one who rides with him. The broad-shouldered one. Yes, I was in the back returning a bolt of fabric to Mrs. Hensley, and they didn't know I was there." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Thomas said he needed the problem handled before the government man arrived. He said—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He said it didn't have to be permanent. Just long enough that the Bennett woman couldn't testify." The room went very quiet. Lily heard her own heartbeat. "Long enough that I couldn't testify," she repeated. "I'm sorry." Clara looked genuinely frightened. "I didn't know whether to come. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood, but I kept thinking about Emma, and You did the right thing." Lily set her own cup down with a steadiness that surprised her. "Exactly the right thing. Thank you, Clara." After Clara left, Lily stood at the window for a moment. Not long. Long enough to let the fear move through her and out the other side the way she'd learned to do, not fighting it, not pretending it wasn't there, but refusing to let it make her decisions. Then she went to find Caleb. He was at the fence line repairing the corner post he'd been working on since she moved in. She told him what Clara had heard word for word, and she watched his hands stop moving on the wood. He turned around. "You're not staying here alone," he said. "Caleb, I'm not negotiating this." The quiet in his voice was the kind of quiet that has hard edges. "Emma is 4 years old, and there's a man in this valley who just discussed having you incapacitated, and I am not spending nights at my own ranch while that is the situation. I'll bring what I need. I'll sleep in the lean-to if the propriety concerns you." It did not concern her, not even slightly. "The lean-to is too cold," she said. "Take the chair by the fire." He looked at her. "We're past the point of worrying about appearances, Caleb. Someone might try to hurt me before a federal advocate arrives to take their power away. That matters more than what the settlement thinks about our sleeping arrangements." He nodded once. "I'll get my things." He moved in that afternoon, and his presence in the cabin changed the quality of everything, not in the way she'd feared it might not. In a way that felt like displacement or imposition, but in the way that a house changes when it stops being defended by one person and starts being held by two. Emma received the development with complete approval and immediately began reorganizing her understanding of the household to include him as a permanent fixture. The next 6 days were tense in the specific way of waiting for something you know is coming, but don't know the shape of. Caleb kept watch in the evenings. He varied the times he was outside, versus in never establishing a pattern that could be planned around. Lily kept Emma close and kept working the fence, the stores, the never-ending small maintenance of a homestead in the middle of winter, because stopping felt like surrender, and surrender was not available to her. On the 7th day, Thomas came himself. She was outside when he arrived, which she was glad of. She didn't want him near Emma, didn't want his voice in her cabin. She walked toward him before he dismounted, putting herself between him and the door. He looked different. The controlled quality was fraying at the edges. The careful management of his expression coming apart in small ways. Something too tight around his eyes. Something too deliberate about his stillness. "The government man," he said. "Call him off." She stared at him. "Write to him. Tell him you've resolved the situation. Tell him there's no case." He looked down at her from the saddle. "I'll give you fair value for the land. Enough to go east. Enough to give Emma a real start." "I have a real start," she said. "I'm standing on it. Lily." He said her name with something that might have been in another universe a trace of genuine feeling. "You don't understand what you're walking into. Webb isn't just after Cross. He's building a case against the whole survey arrangement. Marsh, the railroad partners, the men behind the federal grant applications. When he pulls on this thread, the people it's attached to are not going to quietly accept being exposed. They will not be reasonable about it. Are you threatening me on their behalf? I'm warning you." He met her eyes. "There's a difference." "There isn't." She held his gaze without blinking. "Not from where I'm standing. You put me in the snow to die, Thomas. You took my daughter from me for 12 hours and let me freeze because someone told you the land was valuable and offered you something for clearing it. And now you're sitting on a horse on my property, telling me that powerful men are going to be angry, as though the existence of angry, powerful men is something I'm supposed to find more frightening than everything that's already happened." He said nothing. "It isn't," she said. "Not even close. You're making a mistake." "I've made mistakes. This isn't one." She stepped back toward the door. "Get off my land, Thomas, and don't come back." He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him weighing it, calculating the way he'd always calculated, and then he turned his horse and left. She stood there until he was gone. Then she went inside, sat down at the table, and let her hands shake for exactly 60 seconds. Then she pressed them flat on the table, breathed and stopped. Caleb had been inside. He'd heard everything through the door. He didn't say anything about the shaking. He poured coffee and put it in front of her and sat down, and that was all. She loved him for that. She didn't say it, she was nowhere near ready to say it, but she felt it clearly the way you feel a thing that is true before you have words for it. "He's scared," she said, "which makes him more dangerous." "I know." She wrapped her hands around the cup. 8 more days until Webb. The 8th day brought something none of them expected. Margaret Bennett came to the cabin. Alone. No horse, which meant she'd walked the 1.5 miles from the settlement in the February cold, which told Lily something about how urgent this felt to Thomas's wife, or rather how urgent it had become for Margaret to do something that was not what Thomas wanted her to do. She came in and stood just inside the door and looked at Lily with the expression of a woman who has spent several weeks building up to a thing and is now committed to it, whether she feels ready or not. Emma was at the table drawing. She looked at Margaret, looked at her mother, read the room with 4-year-old instinct, and took her paper and her pencil to the back room without being asked. "Sit down, Margaret," Lily said. Margaret sat. She had a folded paper in her lap that she held with both hands. "Thomas doesn't know I'm here," she said. "I know. I need you to understand something." She looked at the table, then forced herself to look up. "What happened on the trail? I did tell him we couldn't leave you. I told him 3 times. I know that doesn't undo it. I know that saying the right thing and not fighting hard enough for it is basically the same as saying nothing." Her voice caught, then steadied. "I've been thinking about that for 6 weeks, about the difference between objecting and acting." "Why are you here, Margaret?" She put the folded paper on the table and pushed it toward Lily. "Because Thomas kept a letter. From the man who arranged all of this, the railroad contact who approached him in Missouri before we left. The man explained the plan and what Thomas would receive in exchange." She looked at the paper. "Thomas kept it. I think he kept it because he didn't fully trust them, because he wanted leverage of his own if things went wrong. He hid it in his boot." Lily looked at the paper on the table. "I found it 2 days ago," Margaret said. "He doesn't know." Lily picked it up slowly, unfolded it. It was a letter on embossed stationery from a railroad concern based in Denver. She didn't know the name, but it would mean something to Webb, she was certain of that. It laid out with the calm directness of a business transaction what Thomas was being asked to do and what he would receive in exchange. Clear the Bennett claim from the East Tributary Corridor by any means necessary. Ensure the claimant is unable to contest. In return, $5,000 and right of first purchase on a parcel in the Southern Valley at below market price. Clear the claimant by any means necessary. Her hands were very steady. "He has a copy of this," she said. "I don't think so. I think this is the original. He wouldn't make a copy too dangerous." Lily looked up at Margaret. Why you could have burned this. You could have pretended you never found it. Thomas would never have known." Margaret looked at her with red-rimmed eyes and a set jaw. "Because I have children," she said. "And I would like them to grow up with a mother who, when it actually mattered, did the right thing." She paused. "Even if she did it 6 weeks too late." Lily sat with that. Then she reached across the table and covered Margaret's hand with her own. Just briefly. Just enough. "Thank you," she said. This is the thing that ends it." Margaret nodded and pressed her lips together and didn't cry, though she was close. "Can I see Emma?" Lily stood and went to the back room door. "Emma, come say hello to your Aunt Margaret." Emma came out, saw Margaret cross to her with the directness of childhood, and put both arms around her neck. Margaret held on like someone holding on to something solid in moving water. Lily looked away. Aldous Webb arrived on a Tuesday in a plain coat on a plain horse without ceremony or announcement. He came directly to her cabin, rather than stopping in the settlement first, which told her Foles had briefed him thoroughly on who was trustworthy and who was not. How was smaller than she'd expected. Somewhere in his 50s, lean and precise with sharp gray eyes, and the particular quality of a man who has spent years in bureaucratic combat and emerged from it not cynical, but harder purified by it, like metal through fire. He shook her hand with a firm grip and looked around the cabin and said, "Show me everything." She showed him everything. The registration papers, Ellen Dobbins's written account, the letter from the railroad concern in Denver that Margaret had taken from Thomas's boot, the contest filing from the county recorder, Foles's correspondence, her own written account of the blizzard, the abandonment, the conversation with Cross, the confrontation with Thomas on the settlement road. All of it organized in order the way she'd been preparing it for a week. Caleb sat in the corner and said nothing, which was exactly right. Emma stayed in the back room with Clara, who had come to manage the domestic situation with the practical competence of a woman who understood that important things were happening. Webb read for 40 minutes. He didn't say anything while he read. He turned pages, carefully went back twice to check things against each other, made 2 brief notes in a small leather book. Then he set everything down and looked at Lily. "The Denver letter," he said. "Do you know how significant this is? I have an idea. The concern named in this letter is the holding company for a consortium of investors who have been acquiring railroad right-of-way access across 3 territories using Dorian Marsh as their federal instrument. Marsh identifies the parcels, manufactures or assists in manufacturing title defects, and Cross, or someone like Cross in other valleys, handles the local execution." He tapped the letter. "This is the first written documentation that directly links the Denver concern to the instruction to remove a claimant. Every other case I've built the Denver connection was inferential. This is explicit." Lily held his gaze. "Will it hold? With Ellen Dobbins' testimony, your account, and this letter?" "Yes." He said it without qualification, without softening. "Marsh is finished. The Denver consortium will face federal charges. Cross will lose his position and very likely face criminal prosecution for land fraud." He paused. "And Thomas Bennett will spend a significant amount of time answering questions about any means necessary." She breathed. Just breathed once fully. "What happens to my land?" "Your registration stands. The contest filing will be dismissed. I'll see to that personally before I leave the valley. The Dobbins assignment is void. Your 160 acres is unencumbered." He looked at her steadily. "The railroad will still want a right-of-way through the East Tributary Corridor. That negotiation will happen, but it will happen properly with you at fair value, with legal counsel of your choosing on your terms." On her terms. She thought about the letter Thomas had received from Denver. Clear the claimant by any means necessary. She had been a claimant to be cleared. An obstruction. An inconvenience. "And they'll negotiate with me," she said. "They'll negotiate with you." Webb closed his leather book. "They don't have another option." What happened next happened fast. The way justice sometimes does when it finally arrives with the right tools and enough authority to use them. Webb met with Cross the following morning. She wasn't in the room, but Caleb was. Webb had asked him to come as a witness, a local resident with knowledge of the valley and no stake in the outcome, except the ones that were legitimate. And Caleb described it to her that evening with the quiet precision she'd come to expect from him. Cross had been composed for the first 5 minutes. He'd offered his version of events, deployed his familiar smooth voice, positioned himself as a mediator who'd been caught between competing parties, and done his reasonable best. Webb had put the Denver letter on the table. Cross's composure lasted another 30 seconds after that. Then it fell apart in the specific way that carefully constructed things fall apart when the foundation is pulled out, not dramatically, just all at once, the whole structure losing coherence simultaneously. He confirmed everything. Marsh, the railroad concern, the fraudulent Dobbins assignment, the arrangement with Thomas. He offered cooperation in exchange for reduced charges, which Webb accepted with the neutrality of a man who had gotten what he needed and was storing the emotion of it for later. Dorian Marsh was reached by telegraph before the end of the day. Webb filed the federal papers within 24 hours. Thomas left the valley before anyone could formally approach him, which meant he was going to spend a long time looking over his shoulder for the federal summons that was already being prepared. Margaret and the children stayed. That had been Margaret's decision, made quietly and without drama the morning after she'd come to Lily's cabin. She'd found a room at Hattie's boarding house, and she was making arrangements, and she didn't ask Lily for anything except the one thing Lily would have given her regardless: access to Emma. On the 3rd day after Webb's arrival, Lily stood in Cross's former office. The land agent position had been vacated rather suddenly, and watched Webb hand her a document that confirmed the dismissal of the contest filing and the unencumbered status of her homestead claim. It was a single page. Plain paper. The official seal of the Department of Interior in the corner. She held it. She thought about a frozen trail and a thin blanket and a prayer sent to whatever lived behind the sky. She thought about hoofbeats through the blizzard. She thought about the particular weight of a man deciding what kind of man he was going to be. "It's over," she said. "The legal part," Webb said. "The rest is just living." He left 2 days later, back to whatever the next valley was, the next marsh, the next consortium of men who looked at land and saw only the money underneath it. He shook her hand at the door of Hattie's boarding house and said, "What you built here, the evidence, the organization, that's what made this possible. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She didn't tell anyone otherwise. The railroad negotiation happened in April, when the snow was finally retreating from the south-facing slopes, and the East Tributary Creek was doing exactly what Caleb had promised Emma, running loud and clear, audible from the cabin in the still mornings. Lily sat across from 3 men in good coats and negotiated the right-of-way easement on a strip of her eastern boundary, with Gareth Foles at her left elbow and Caleb at her right. The men in good coats were polite and professional and gave absolutely no indication that their company had once paid a man to ensure she didn't survive a blizzard. She gave them no indication that she was thinking about it either. She came out of that negotiation with an easement price that surprised even Foles and the specific satisfaction of a person who has played a long game and seen it through. Walking out of the building afterward, Foles said, "You know, Robert told me once that you were the sharper of the two of you. He said he hoped you'd never need to prove it." She thought about Robert. The foresight he'd hidden in small practical acts, an address memorized, a claim filed in her name, a lawyer told to wait for her voice before acting for anyone else. He was right about both parts, she said. Foles shook her hand, promised to visit in summer, and rode east. It was Caleb who built the shelf in Emma's room. He did it in February, 2 days after he'd promised, exactly as negotiated. He did it with care, measured twice, cut clean, sanded the edges so there were no splinters. Emma supervised the entire process with crossed arms and serious commentary, and accepted the finished product with the critical approval of someone who had held her expectations firm and been satisfied. "It's good," she told him. "You can build the next one." "What next one?" "For when you live here," Emma said, and walked away to arrange her things on the shelf with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child who has simply stated a fact that the adults around her have been slow to catch up to. Caleb looked at Lily. Lily looked at Caleb. She thought about a man who had spent 4 years building walls and calling them wisdom. She thought about what it had cost him every single day to be here. Not the labor, not the time, but the opening of something he had shut very carefully against further damage. She thought about Eleanor, who had not been afraid of big things. She thought about Robert, who had loved her well and imperfectly, and left her better equipped for life than she'd understood at the time. She thought the people we lose teach us how to recognize the people worth finding. "She's not wrong," Lily said. Caleb was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is full of things settling into their right places. "No," he said. "She generally isn't." I took her hand simply without ceremony, the way he did most things, and she held it, and outside the creek was running loud over its stones, and the sky above the East Tributary Ridge was the hard, clear blue of a Wyoming spring, arriving exactly when it was supposed to, patient and certain, unhurried by anything men had tried to put in its way. Lily Bennett had come to this valley to be disappeared, left in the snow by people who believed that a woman alone had no power worth accounting for, no claim worth honoring, no life worth the inconvenience of preserving. They had been wrong about all of it. She had 160 acres under a clear blue sky registered in her name, unencumbered and undisputed. She had a daughter who would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for something and won. She had the sound of the creek through the open window and a shelf in the back room, and a man beside her who had decided on one dark winter night to be the kind of man who stops. Some things in life you choose. Some things choose you in blizzards and courtrooms, and small quiet moments that don't announce themselves as important until later. When you look back and see the hinge they were. This had been both. And it had been enough. It had been more than enough.